Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the installment of Scott Selections here for Friday, August 27th. Now, this is a special edition of Scott Selections because I already gave out the play of the day, as all of you know, several hours ago. But college football does officially start on Saturday. And with that being the case, I decided to go through some win totals and discuss my favorites. Now, this might sound a little bit repetitive because I ended up giving out all of these plays in the joint show with Scott Steen. However, there are a lot of picks that I ended up doing in each video. So to make it easier, I decided to just consolidate everything into one video. And that way you can get the picks immediately instead of having to dive through each individual joint show. So without further ado, I'm not exactly sure how long this is going to take, but hopefully it'll probably take around 10-15 minutes. We'll see. But starting off with my favorite, or not really my favorite, but one of the first win total that I really like. It's going to be in order that I gave them out on the joint show, so there is no order in terms of my favorite play to my least favorite. But either way, one play per conference. Starting off with the Conference USA, looking at Old Dominion under 4.5 wins at -130 on FanDuel. Team went 1-11 in 2019, did not play last year. Only win was against Norfolk State by 3. So even when they did win a game in 2019, it was against an FCS team. And the issue you have with Old Dominion is that this team's going to be favored in maybe one or two games all year versus Hampton, and then maybe at UTEP, maybe not. But everything else in conference play should be a mess for Old Dominion. They bring in a brand new head coach who's never been a head coach before. You have a transfer quarterback in DJ Mack Jr., who went to UCF, who's pretty good, but he's a solid runner, inconsistent passer. And I really just think Old Dominion might win 2-3 games tops, but 4.5 is way too high. I'll take that to the bank. Looking at the second win total that I like, it's going to be on the MAC. I like Toledo over 8.5 wins at +100 on FanDuel. They should be favored in at least 10 games this season. Only exceptions are going to be at Notre Dame and at Ball State. And the Ball State one's a question mark. They might be favored in that one as well. But they get to play Akron, Bowling Green, UMass, and Norfolk State, which is just 4 free wins right on the schedule. Most talented team in the conference by far, and they bring back every single coach. They bring back the head coach. They bring back the defensive coordinator, the offensive coordinator. I think you'll see this team potentially run the table in the MAC, but 8.5 wins is just too low. I think this team will probably win 9, maybe even 10 games. And looking at the Mountain West, we're going to be looking at the worst team in the entire conference. You have UNLV, and we like the under 1.5 wins at -110 on BetMGM. Team went 0-6 last year. Each loss was by at least 13 points. They're going to be favored in one game this season against Eastern Washington. And truth is, I'm not even sure if they're going to be favored in that game. I know that's going to be the opening game for the season, but there is no official line out. I think the spread's going to be pretty close. I know a couple of projections actually have Eastern Washington winning. I think that game should be a war, but in conference play, UNLV is just an absolute mess. So I'm going to take the under 1.5. I think that team, if they lose the first game to Eastern Washington, you can cash that ticket in about a week. So keep that in mind. Now, looking at another awful team that we're going to be talking about, we're going to be looking at UL Monroe in the Sun Belt, and we like under 1.5 wins at +125 on BetMGM. Team went 0-10 last year, lost 9 games by at least 18 points. The crazy part is they never led in a single game. That's right. They went the entire season being down 0-0 and then trailing at some point without ever taking a lead, which is almost impossible. But anyway, brand new head coach in Terry Bowden. They got Rich Rod as the offensive coordinator, and they also have the youngest defensive coordinator in the nation. But the point is, with a lot of brand new head coaches and faces, I do think you'll see this team struggle in the first year with all these new faces. Plus, they're going to be underdogs in every game except Jackson State, Dion's team. And I don't think Dion's team is amazing by any means for an FCS standard, but UL Monroe is really bad. I just think that if they end up winning that game to Jackson State, which they should, I don't see them winning a conference game. I think they're going to be awful. Now, looking at some other conferences, looking at East Carolina in the AAC, I like the under 5.5 wins at +120 on FanDuel. Team went 3-6 last year. This team's been awful for several years. Now, they're actually supposed to be decent so far this season, but I simply just think that 3 wins is too big of a jump from 3 to 6. I don't think they're going to make a bowl game. You're looking at the out-of-conference schedule: Appalachian State, South Carolina, at Marshall, and Charleston Southern. Now, of course, Charleston Southern's a free win. App State's good. South Carolina's supposed to be bad, but I think we all know South Carolina still has better recruits and talent in the SEC in comparison to East Carolina in the AAC. And at Marshall, I just think that's going to be a tough game. I think Marshall will win that one. Plus, East Carolina has to play at UCF in conference and Cincinnati at home. I just see a couple of losses there. I mean, based on the games, not counting the Charleston Southern game, I see 5 losses there. and I just don't think that they're going to be able to run the table with the rest of the conference. I think they'll win maybe 5 games. You might have to sweat it, but at plus money for under 5.5 for a team that won 3 games last year with that schedule, I just think is a little bit too much to ask for. Give me the under plus money. Now, looking at the independents, looking at UMass, and I like the over 1.5 wins at minus 150 on Fox Bet. I know UMass is terrible. This is purely based on the schedule. They have 4 winnable games this season: UConn, Rhode Island, Maine, and at New Mexico State. Now, UConn, I think they'll probably lose, but UConn, we know, is also one of the worst teams in FBS. Rhode Island and Maine are both, I'd say, mediocre FCS teams, not great. And then at New Mexico State, I think they could actually win because I think New Mexico State might be the worst team in all of FBS. But over 1.5 wins, you need to split those 4 games. All they have to do is beat the 2 FCS teams on the schedule, and you go over. I think they got a shot to do it. I'll take the over there at minus 150. But looking at everything else, they do have a new 4-star recruit, or a former 4-star recruiter transferred over from Colorado in Lytle. So they do have a talented quarterback, and they do have a lot of experience from last year's terrible team. So maybe they'll show signs of life, but the schedule is easy. I got to go with UMass over there. Looking at the ACC, I like NC State over 6.5 wins at plus 100 on BetMGM. NC State went 8-4 last year, and that was with a bunch of different quarterbacks because Leary got injured early on in the year. Leary's good, very talented quarterback. He's back. They have the same running backs and wide receiver groups, so they should be fine there. Linebacker Peyton Wilson came back, leading tackler, and they have 9 defensive starters returning. And you're looking at the schedule. They play USF, they play Furman, La Tech, Syracuse, all those games at home. Then at FSU, which should also be a win because FSU is not going to be good this year. And you have at Mississippi State, which I have a question mark for a free win because Mississippi State should probably be a little bit better with the Leach, but they weren't good last year. I think NC State's just the better team. So I think NC State, if they win all the games I just mentioned, that's 6 wins right there. And even if they lose one of them, that's still 5. They're in a good spot there in the conference. I think they'll win probably 8 or 9. I think 6.5 is way too low, especially at plus money. Now looking at the Big 12, I like TCU over 7.5 wins at minus 118 on Fox Bet. You have Dugan back at quarterback, who is okay, but he has experience. You have several running backs who are pretty good, though. 3 offensive linemen return. The defense should be the strength, though. A lot of experience coming back. Gary Patterson is still the head coach, and the schedule is quite favorable. You play Duquesne, California, and SMU out of conference, all at home, so they should win all 3 of those games. And they have a lot of conference games at home, which definitely should bode well for them. They play Texas at home, and TCU has dominated Texas in recent years. They have West Virginia at home, play Baylor at home, and Kansas. Now, West Virginia used to be decent. Not really anymore. I'd say they're one of the weaker teams in the conference. So is Baylor. Kansas, we know, is awful. And Texas, I think TCU can win that game. But the point is, if they win all 7 of those games I just mentioned, then they need to win 1 more. And they still play Texas Tech, who's not very good. A couple other options there. I think 7.5 is too low. I think TCU will probably win 8 or 9 games. Looking at the Big 10, I like Wisconsin over 9.5 wins at minus 110 on DraftKings. Most of the tough conference games are at home, so I think that bodes well. They also have a neutral site game against a weak Notre Dame team. Now, Notre Dame's over-under for win totals 8.5, so even though they're a top 10 team, people are expecting a ton of regression from the Fighting Irish. And Wisconsin has a bye week leading into that matchup, while Notre Dame does not. So I think Wisconsin will take advantage of the rest and take care of business against a Notre Dame there, and I believe Chicago in that neutral site. But luckily for Wisconsin, no Ohio State on the regular season schedule. They play Penn State, Michigan, Iowa, and Northwestern, but they're all at home. So I definitely think that's going to work out well because Wisconsin tends to play really well in Camp Randall. And then you play at Minnesota, and Minnesota had a great run in PJ Fleck's first year, but last year they kind of fell back down to earth, and I'm curious if they're going to struggle once again with a little bit of, let's just say, uncertainty going on just with the overall team there with Minnesota. But looking at the SEC, I'm looking at Vanderbilt under 3.5 at minus 105 on BetMGM. Team went 0-9 last year. They brought in a former Notre Dame defensive coordinator in Clark Leah to be the head coach. They got a brand new offensive coordinator, but they easily have the worst defense in the conference. They're going to give up a ton of points, and it's not going to be pretty. Out of conference schedule, they play East Tennessee at home, at Colorado State, play Stanford at home, and Connecticut. I think they'll probably go 2-2. I think they'll lose to Colorado State in Colorado, and I think they're going to lose to Stanford. So if you have 2 wins there, then you go into conference, and their schedule is brutal. I mean, you play Georgia at home, at Florida, at South Carolina, Mississippi State, Missouri, Kentucky, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. Tennessee's on the road. I think that one maybe, but I doubt it. I think Tennessee has too much talent. South Carolina is the one where you can make an argument that they should have maybe a puncher's chance to win, but it's at South Carolina. I don't see Vanderbilt winning a conference game. So even if they hypothetically beat Colorado State and go 3-1 out of conference, I don't think they're going to go. I don't think they're going to win a game in the SEC. So I still like the under 3.5 at -105 until they show me some signs of life defensively. And last but not least, looking at the Pac-12, Oregon State under 5 at -135 on DraftKings. It's available at every other book at over under 4.5. So you're picking up a free half win there of cushion at just an extra 25 cents a juice. Now, Jefferson is no longer the running back, which is a huge problem because he was easily the best player. And now the other options aren't exactly great. You have Gebbia back at quarterback, who was, let's just say, streaky, to put it gently. He really wasn't that good last year. At a conference schedule at Purdue, Hawaii at home, and Idaho at home. They'll lose to Purdue, and they'll beat Idaho. But are we sure they're going to beat Hawaii at home? I'm not exactly sure about that. We'll see how that goes, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if Hawaii wins that one. And the conference games, you play at USC, you play at home against Washington, at home against Utah, at home against Arizona State, and at Oregon. They're not winning any of those 5 games. So you can just look right now. If you think they're going to lose to Hawaii 2, that means they're starting the year 1-7, which means that you automatically get a push, worst case scenario. At the end of the day, you might end up getting a team that wins 5 games exactly, but I think there's no chance they win 6. So for that reason, I'll take the 5 at -135 on DraftKings. Other than that, though, that has been the special edition of Scott Selections here for the college football season-long win totals. And good luck to all of you and respect the best today. Bye, everyone.